Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. A garbage election. I hate name calling. I do not care which party or politician does it. In this case, the Democrats had little to promote, so decided to engage in horrendous attacks using terms like fascist and calling Trump Hitler. This actually moved some votes into the GOP column. This backfired to people with an IQ higher than the temperature of cool water. It especially angered many Jewish people for obvious reasons. So much for the Joy campaign, right? In a bitter irony, in the last days of the campaign, Steve Bannon was released from prison after serving 4 months for contempt of Congress. Democrats, going back to Obama administration, have not served a single day in prison. So who are the fascists in Washington? In Texas, the Democrats ran ads against Ted Cruz for his abortion views. The problem is that this is a federal race. That's right. Running for U.S. Senate is a federal race. Because of the Dodd decision, abortion is now state by state. Totally ridiculous position by the Cruz attackers. And my regular audience knows that I believe the Texas law is badly flawed when women with legitimate medical issues cannot get help inside the state. The life of the mother must always be paramount. That needs to be fixed at the state level, not in Washington. And Trump had a very successful rally in Madison Square Garden. For some reason, they had an unscreened comedian do a routine. And yes, he stupidly referred to Puerto Rico as an island of garbage. It was bad, and most GOP politicians distanced themselves from this remark immediately. In any event, good old Joe Biden makes a remark a couple days later referring to anyone supporting Trump as garbage. The Dems immediately tried to back it down, but the damage was already done. In the meantime, that bitter old biddy, the ultimate sore loser, Hillary Clinton, had to shoot her mouth off in a desperate attempt to sound relevant and sell copies of her useless book. Of course, this was on the Communist News Network, aka CNN. She compared the Trump rally to a rally by Nazi supporters in Madison Square Garden in 1939. However, she could indeed have compared the rally in Madison Square Garden to the 1933 rally by Jewish Americans concerned about the takeover of Germany by the Nazis. Trump referred to Harris as low IQ during the closing days of the election. She is indeed incompetent in her position as VP and was a terrible politician. None of this means she is actually stupid. In the general scheme of things, name calling instead of focusing on the issues usually is the mark of bad politicians, regardless of party affiliation. So yes, the 2024 elections will go down as the garbage elections. May we Americans all do better in the future. We deserve better. Jeff Bezos decided that the Washington Post wouldn't endorse for president. A major story in the last days of the far too long 2024 election cycle was that a few major newspapers decided to reverse path and not endorse. The one that earned the most press was when Jeff Bezos, a billionaire due to his Amazon company and owner of the pathetic far-left Washington Post, wrote an op-ed explaining that politics have gone too far in the newspaper business. Pardon me while I laugh my butt off, folks. The so-called major newspapers sold out to the far left decades ago. The only exception, sort of, is the Wall Street Journal. Subscriptions to print newspapers have been dropping ever since. For many people, even the time-honored tradition of reading the Sunday paper is gone. Of course, part of it is the march of technology. The other part is due to our misguided and failing education system. Reading and thinking are not really being taught. Commentators have noted that the bigwigs in technology who are famously against Trump began to quiet it down near the election when the winds of change began to move in his favor. None of them went as far as Elon Musk, but it's still a fascinating movement. So Bezos, without admitting that the whack left views have killed his newspaper, did admit that politics are off the chart and nobody believes the newspapers today. He also made a monetary notation. Why endorse when it will not change the minds of the voters anyway? So endorsements alienate a big part of your audience. That translates into lost subscribers and lost advertisers. What I love is that 2 members of the Post editorial board reportedly quit when he did not let them endorse Harris. I will not believe Bezos got the message unless he replaces half of his editorial and reporting staffs with responsible right-wingers. How about people like Victor Davis Hanson and yours truly? Former Marine prosecuted in New York City for defending subway passengers from a crazed person with a long criminal record. I cannot make up this sad headline, but after all, it is New York City, once the star of America, now site of gangs running through famed Times Square. So you have Jordan Neely, who has previously committed violence in the subway system and has been arrested 40 times, causing mayhem in a subway car in May 2023. Penny encounters Neely on a New York City subway. Neely was acting erratically and threatening passengers. Witnesses have testified that Neely said, "Someone is going to die today." So Penny and 2 others restrained Neely until he settled down, maybe a little too settled, as the claim is that he died from compression to his neck. Prosecutors have charged Penny with a second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. One take on this sad situation is that Neely is black and Penny is white. Question if the skin colors were reversed, would this have even made the news at all? Is this equal justice? I believe in Texas, we would have given Penny a medal. Texas teacher cheating scandal may have put hundreds of unqualified teachers in the classroom. This is a story that strikes home for me as a professor and a father of a high school teacher in another state. My university prepares students for certification exams. That is serious business. So the story here is that accused as the organizer of the scam was a basketball coach at Booker T. Washington High School here in Houston. He may have made as much as $1 million by charging persons afraid to take or unable to pass licensing exams to be teachers. The reported testing fee was $2,500 a shot. Outgoing Harris County DA Kim Ogg announced this prosecution, indicating that the scam dates back to 2020. For others, in addition to the coach, are accused of the scandal. Ogg stated, "The extent of this scheme will never be fully known, but we know that at least 400 tests were taken and at least 200 teachers falsely certified." In Texas, we have what are called independent school districts. Houston ISD is one of the largest systems in the country, not just the state of Texas. Those involved in the scam have been removed. I doubt they have been able to track down all the teachers who were improperly certified. Those with information have been urged to call Crime Stoppers. In a story from multiple sources, including Reuters, the U.S. approved a $2 billion arms sale to Taiwan. Included in the package are anti-missile defense systems that have been tested out in Ukraine fairly recently. Apparently, despite the protests from the CCP, Taiwan is entitled to get defensive weapons from the United States. As many of my audience know, my position is that the history documents that the only legitimate government of China is the one in Taiwan. So anytime the CCP wants to turn over operation of the mainland to the government of Taiwan, I'm prepared to support unification. However, I will never support it in the other direction. Communism has never worked throughout the world. Why impose it on our ally, Taiwan? The feds have been touting some amazing employment numbers in the months leading up to the election. At the same time, the real story does not support this on at least one level. As I have previously reported, store closings are at a sad level. The list has included Walgreens, CVS, Denny's, Conn's Appliance, Bed Bath & Beyond, Sears, Red Lobster, and I mentioned 7-Eleven fairly recently. Apparently, a new concept for 7-Eleven will be in about 600 locations by 2027. These will be larger and food-focused with a wider variety of food choices. On the flip side, TGI Fridays is closing another 49 locations, bringing the 2024 total to about 100. They have about 160 locations left. My favorite story of the fouled up 2024 election was the feds suing Virginia since Governor Youngkin had local election officials purge non-citizens, right, non-citizens from the voting rolls. Reportedly, there were 1,600 non-citizens removed in this latest purge. In a real commentary on which party has the best interest of Americans, the Dem-controlled Department of Injustice sued Virginia in federal district court to require those people to be put back on the voting list. So Virginia did the responsible thing and went to the Supreme Court. SCOTUS ruled 6-3 a week before the election that Virginia could hold off restoring the names to the voting list until a trial on the merits was held. Obviously, there was not going to be a trial prior to the election. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people, and I think when you hear this next interview, you're going to agree that this gentleman, Michael Higson, is indeed one of America's interesting people. We welcome him for his first interview on Saving America. Michael Higson is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and international lecturer. Blind since birth, he survived the 9/11 attacks with the help of his guide dog, Roselle. This story of teamwork and his indomitable will to live and thrive is subject of his best-selling book, Thunder Dog. Higson gives hundreds of presentations around the world each year, speaking to high-profile groups such as ExxonMobil, AT&T, and Federal Express, to name just a few. His topics include ethics, the real bottom line, moving beyond diversity to inclusion, preparing your life skills toolbox. Higson is an ambassador for the National Braille Literacy Campaign for the National Federation of the Blind, and also serves as ambassador for the American Humane Association's Hero Dog Awards. In countless TV and radio appearances, feature articles, and speaking engagements, Higson does much more than simply tell his own 9/11 story. He continuously explores the broader lessons of life and experiences. I had to shorten this incredible bio, or I would not have time for the interview itself. This is not my first meeting with Michael. He interviewed me about 2 years ago, and I am delighted to finally have a chance to interview him. We welcome Michael Higson for his first appearance on Saving America.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and gee, with it being the first one, I guess that means maybe we'll get to do more. All I can say is what you read about that guy, I want to meet that guy someday. but it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, David, and I'm really grateful that you invited me to come on.
And it's so great to reconnect. And as you know, we ask our guests 3 questions, and our first one is, in your early life, you had to transcend a world that was not as accommodating as it might be today. Please share with the audience how you progressed from being blind at birth through college and into your profession.
When I was born, it wasn't known that I was blind. I was born 2 months premature and given a pure oxygen environment, which was the standard thing to do for premature kids. And it had been discovered by a gentleman at the Wilmer Eye Institute in Johns Hopkins that doing the procedure of giving a child pure oxygen environment could cause blindness, but medical science wasn't ready to recognize that. They didn't realize that too much of any good thing is a problem. But the bottom line is, after about being born and living 4 months, my aunt discovered or noticed that I wasn't reacting to sunlight. And when they took me to the hospital to have my eyes examined, they discovered that I was blind. The doctor's response to discovering that was to tell my parents, send him to a home for handicapped children, because no blind child can ever grow up to be a contributor to society, and all he's going to do is take up all the love in your family, and that won't be good for your older son. My parents said, you're wrong. He can grow up to do whatever he wants to do, and we're going to give him that opportunity. And I grew up with that kind of attitude. So I was born in Chicago, traveled around the neighborhood with my brother and cousins and so on, went to kindergarten in Chicago at the age of 4. And my parents had advocated and worked with other parents of blind children who were born premature, mostly, that needed to deal with it. And they actually got a kindergarten class set up for for blind kids. And so in kindergarten at the age of 4, I started to learn Braille and learn some other things. And the bottom line is that then next year we moved to California, and I ended up having to take a second year of kindergarten because credits didn't advance going from Chicago to California that kindergarten is already done. So the other problem is that there were no programs for blind kids where we grew up in the Antelope Valley in Palmdale, California. So until the 4th grade, I didn't have access to Braille books, but my parents took up the slack and helped me with things. My dad taught me how to do algebra even in my head by the time I was 6. And my mother helped with things and so on. And then I was able to, at the age of 8 to 9, going into the 4th grade, the school had several blind children by then, and they hired a woman, Cora Hirschberger, as a resource teacher to help blind kids in the school district. And so that got me Braille books and so on, which was great. And along the way, I kind of developed an interest for science. My father was an electronics electrical engineer, and so I was always interested in radios and stuff like that, and he got me a radio kit and things like that. But the bottom line is that science always interested me. So I joined the Boy Scouts also, and did pretty well. I became an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts of America, joined the Order of the Arrow, the Honor Society, and became Vigil, which is the highest rank available in the Order of the Arrow. My father and I both got our ham radio licenses when I was 14. He waited until I could get mine so that we could share the hobby. And then at the age of 14, going into high school, I got my first guide dog. I had been just walking around my neighborhood and school and so on without anything, a guide dog or a cane, because no one really taught that stuff. But also I was able to hear well enough to navigate. But going to high school, which was a much larger environment, that was a problem. So we had met someone who helped, I think, and advocated for me to be able to get a guide dog at the age of 14, and I did. I got my first guide dog, Squire, who's a golden retriever, and went through high school, did well there, and then went to college at the University of California at Irvine. Having an interest in science, I enrolled in the physics department. I ended up getting a bachelor's and a master's degree in physics from UC Irvine, a secondary teaching credential. And along the way, I joined the National Federation of the Blind, which is the largest organization of blind consumers in the country, and in fact, the world. And while in the Federation, I was approached in, I think, in 1975 at the National Convention by the president of the Federation. And I can't remember whether it was in 1974 or 75, doesn't matter. But he said, we've developed a relationship with a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who's an inventor. Nowadays, he's very known for things like the singularity concept, when computers and people are going to join forces and the intelligence of the computer can be integrated into the intelligence of a person. But at that time, he had developed technology that would allow a computer to literally read any page of print or typed or both material, omnifont optical character recognition. It didn't exist until Ray and his company came along. So the president said that Ray wasn't getting funding from anyone, and so they decided Ray decided to approach the Federation. The Federation, after a little bit of skepticism about what he was doing, actually went up, and one of the people from the Federation went and looked at his machine and discovered that it really did read print, because this guy said, I don't care what you read with your machine, with the print you provide, it's got to read what I bring up. Well, it did, and so the Federation developed a program where we actually, with Ray's help, secured funding from private foundations to allow the Federation to purchase 5 of these reading machines and put them around the country for blind people to use in pretty visible public places, like some agencies for the blind, the New York Public Library, the main branch, and other places, the University of Colorado Library. And my involvement was that the president, Dr. Jernigan, asked if I would do the day-to-day operation of the project, which meant going wherever we put machines, teaching people to use them, seeing how they use them, fixing the machines when they broke, and eventually creating at the end of the project a report which would describe the recommendations that we said had to go into the final version of the machine. So in October of 1976, I flew to Boston, never had been to Boston, much less on my own, and began that process and did it until June of 1978 when the project ended. We wrote the recommendations report, and then Ray hired me to come into the company, so I moved lock, stock, and dog to Massachusetts and began working for Kurzweil, doing the same work I had been doing prior, that is human factors kind of studies. The only problem is that in 1979 in May, I was called into the office of the vice president of marketing. He said, we're having to lay you off. And I said, why? And he said, oh, don't worry. It's not that you're doing a bad job or anything like that. And we'll give you recommendations, but we have hired way too many non-revenue producing people, and we have to get some revenue producers, and we have to lay off some of the people who aren't producing revenue, and you're not really producing revenue, so we're going to have to lay you off. And then he paused and he said, unless you're willing to go into sales. and I sort of sat there for, as I describe it, maybe a thousandth of a nanosecond. And at that time, thoughts went through my head like, well, the unemployment rate among employable blind people at this point is 70%. That's 70% unemployed, employable blind people. I had moved to Boston, didn't want to have to go into a job search mode. So, as I love to tell people, I lowered my standards and went into sales from science and learned how to sell, took a Dale Carnegie sales course that Kurzweil's company funded, and then began selling not the reading machine for the blind at $50,000 a machine, but a new version of the machine called the Kurzweil data entry machine, which is what they wanted me to sell. And I realized that if they wanted me to sell that, then they must have some real confidence in me. And I was given the sales territory of New England and all of Canada and started selling that machine by the October timeframe of 1979. And so that was when I started truly selling in a professional way. I shouldn't say I started in October because I started selling immediately, but it took a while to, catch up with the whole process. But I did that until 1984, when Kurzweil was purchased by Xerox, and they decided to eliminate all of the salespeople in the data entry machine program because Xerox didn't want the people, they wanted the technology. So then I really did have to go off and find a job. Well, by that time, several things had happened. Kurzweil relocated me back to California as they were working to integrate with Xerox, and I was asked to help integrate the Kurzweil company technology and culture into the West Coast part of Xerox, which I did. So I moved back to California in October of 1981, and in January of 1982, through a friend, I met a woman named Karen Ashurst. Karen was in a wheelchair her whole life, but we hit it off, and the bottom line is in November of 1982, we got married. And we were married for 40 years until she passed away in November of 2022. But the bottom line is that when I started searching for a job, when Xerox eliminated the position, I couldn't find one. I even had a headhunter who had arranged for me to go up to interview for a job in Northern California, but he called the night before the interview and he said, I noticed you do a lot of things with blind people. That's really nice. Is there a blind person somewhere in your family? And I said, yeah, I am. You are? Yes, I am. Well, we're going to have to tell the employer they're going to probably want to cancel the interview. And I said, why? Nothing has changed. Well, yes, it is. You're blind. I said, my resume hasn't changed. Nevertheless, the interview was canceled. So in 1985, I started my own company selling PC-based computer-aided design systems to architects. A blind guy selling graphics, why not? Now, I didn't have the opportunity to run the machine because it was visual, but I learned how to run the machine so I could sit somebody down in front of it when salespeople we hired were involved with other things, and I could walk somebody through the process. The bottom line is blindness isn't the problem. It's people's attitudes about blindness as described with the doctors in the beginning and so on. But anyway, I did that for 4 years, and then I went back into the workforce. And when I decided I wanted to go back into the workforce and sold the company, my wife and I were looking at newspapers one day, and she saw a job advertisement that looked really pretty cool. And so I said to her, well, I'll go write a letter, should I say, in the cover letter that I'm blind, because that's always been a dilemma. Typically, if you send a cover letter with a resume and you say you're blind, they'll never even call you back. If you don't say that, you might get the interview, but then when you get down there, all the defenses are going to be up and they're going to go, well, how are you going to get to work? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? It doesn't matter, but that's what happens. Anyway, she said, as wives can do, you're a dummy. And I said, why? And she said, what have you always told the people you hired, because I had managed and hired lots of salespeople by then, what's the most important thing that you told people that they need to realize and recognize when they work for you? And I said, well, you're ahead of me. What? She said, you've always said that the most important thing you learned from the Dale Carnegie sales course and that you want salespeople to understand is turn perceived liabilities into assets. What's blindness? It's a perceived liability. Well, a little light went off over my head like they do in the cartoons, and I went off and I wrote a cover letter, and here are what the last 2 paragraphs of the letter said. It's important in answering your question. What I said in the last 2 paragraphs was that the most important thing that you need to know about me when you're considering my resume is that I am blind. As a blind person, I have had to sell all of my life just to survive. I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog into public places a lot of times. We didn't have an ADA at that time, 1989. I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog on airplanes. We actually ended up having to file a lawsuit against one airline that was discriminating against me because of that. That wasn't in the letter, just that the whole concept of I've had to sell to convince people to let me take my guide dog on an airplane. I've had to convince people to let me buy a house that I could afford to do it and take my guide dog into stores and so on. In the second paragraph, so when you're considering to hire me or someone for this job, think about this. Do you want to hire somebody who just comes in for 8 or 10 hours a day and then goes home because the job is over? Or would you like to hire somebody who truly understands sales for the science and art that it is and sells 24 hours a day as a way of life? We sent that letter off, and 2 weeks later, I got a call from the company. Doug Cooper, the head of marketing down in, from where we were living, about 45 miles south in Carlsbad, California. He said, we like what you said. Come down. We want to talk with you. And while I was down there, they hired me. It was great. It was the 3rd of July, and the 4th was a holiday, so you get hired, and the next day's a holiday. That worked for me. But I did join them. And worked in the office selling now to the East Coast because I had lived there. And so did that until 1996 when they asked me to relocate to New York to sell for the company. My wife wasn't excited about that, but we made the move. And she said, I'll do it if it's going to help get you another job and get out of this company because they're not going to handle the office well. That's what she felt. Well, there were issues, but the bottom line is I did get recruited away in 1997, and then the Quantum Corporation recruited me in 1999. Quantum was a manufacturer of the products that people use to back up their computer data over their networks to magnetic tape, and they asked if I would open an office for them in New York. And so I said, sure, looked around, and eventually the bottom line is that we opened the office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center.
As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we're in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye. So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. Early this year, young William Miller Jr. said his grandmother was nearly hit by a car on their walks to get ice cream. They were in a suburb of Phoenix, Goodyear, Arizona. Apparently, there was a lot of street racing along the parkway where they were walking. So this 9-year-old puts on a suit and presented his case to the Goodyear City Council. Well, the good news is that the city council members listened and acted. They increased police traffic patrols, added a crosswalk and a traffic light. It is rare that any citizen, much less a 9-year-old, could get such quick action, and I want to salute him for coming forward, even though he reportedly was nervous speaking before the council. Therefore, Saving America awards William Miller and his family a coveted A grade from Saving America. Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. There's been a surge in the past few years of states and some localities passing what are called pay transparency laws. These laws require pay ranges to be indicated in advertisements and job listings. Vermont has just joined Washington, D.C., Maryland, Illinois, and Minnesota with near-term effective dates. These states are behind California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York, with specific laws in New York City, Ithaca, and Westchester County, Jersey City, New Jersey, and Washington State, where they are already in effect. Other states and localities now requiring notice of pay ranges during the recruitment process include Connecticut, Maryland, Nevada, Cincinnati, and Toledo, Ohio, and Rhode Island. And such laws are under consideration in Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Now, the question is, if this such information is so critical to the recruitment process, why not let the employers make the decision about what to provide and at what point in the hiring process? And it seems that the government, whether it's the state or local governments, really doesn't need to get involved in this process. But in any event, these laws are trending across the country with states and localities passing them as they directly interfere in the hiring employment process. By example, other laws include required paid leave, minimum wage higher than the federal minimum wage, and certain benefits. California has made headlines with a new $20 minimum wage for fast food workers, other than places that make their own bread. Reports are that 9,500 California fast food locations shut down since the law was passed about 6 or 8 months ago. And of course, it just went into effect, I believe, on June 1. Interestingly, some of the states with the most robust hiring and economies, like Texas and Florida, have not adopted such laws. The headline reads, "The Supreme Court rules unanimously in favor of Starbucks." What is the story behind this ruling? Starbucks has been the subject of a national union organizing effort in recent years. About 400 of the company's 9,600 corporate units have voted for a union. This has been a frequent news story, especially since these employees already enjoy much better pay and working conditions than other fast food workers. Starbucks claims that it terminated the employment of the so-called Memphis 7 because these employees violated company policy by letting a television news crew into a company store after business hours. This was part of the employees' effort to unionize the store employees. I'm not sure how that tied together, but that is the allegation. The union complained to the National Labor Relations Board and filed unfair labor practice charges, also known as ULPs. The NLRB claimed that Starbucks interfered with the workers' right to form a union and discriminated against the union members. That's an unfair labor practice, folks. The NLRB secured a preliminary injunction from a federal district court in 2022. The company was ordered to temporarily rehire the fired employees until there was a final court decision. Starbucks, not taking this lying down, appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, which upheld the federal court's order to give these employees back temporary employment. Starbucks, because they have plenty of money, took the case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0, which means the conservative and liberal justices agreed on this point in favor of Starbucks. The ruling was based on the determination by the High Court that in light of the circumstances, the employees would not win their unfair labor practice. So it was wrong to order them back to work in the interim. Interesting decision. Saving America welcomes Dom Einhorn, who comes to us from his home base in Sarlat, France. Incredibly, at 23, moved to the U.S. and created a successful .com startup. He sold that, and in 2001, he moved back to France. He is a serial entrepreneur and CEO of many companies, including digital media, technology, and others. He speaks an amazing 6 languages, including Alsatian. Among his accomplishments, he's the founder and CEO of Unicorn, that's spelled with a Q. This is the largest rural incubator accelerator in the world. I found so much information on the various companies that he started that I really had to edit this down so I could structure my intro and have time for my 3 questions. We welcome Dom Einhorn for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much for having me, David. Looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Well, we'll jump right in. With your terrific record, what is your advice for other entrepreneurs out there, especially those who are interested in tech ventures?
Well, as you know, tech is pretty much all I've done my entire life. I don't know how to do anything else. I have a very peculiar interest. I've never golfed in my life. I played darts once in my life against my old partner who challenged me to a game of darts that, by the way, he lost, even though I had never played. So I guess I made my point there. But when it comes to tech, I've been in tech business since 1993. Clearly, tech has evolved dramatically since that time. It's always moved fast, but it tends to move faster and faster. And the closer you seem to be getting to the horizon, the more it shifts away. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to any entrepreneur in the space, as well as to any investor, is to not focus on what changes, but instead focus on what does not change. And that's usually where we see the real opportunity. Now, what doesn't change? People tend to change a lot less or a lot less faster than technology does. So communities, for example, when you're building a business, a B2C business, business to consumer business online, for example, you're trying to engage with the people, you're trying to retain people, you're trying to nurture people. That sense of community, in my book, is more important than it's ever been, no matter how much the technology changes, no matter how we engage with people. So the early days of the internet, before the Facebooks, before the Instagrams, before the LinkedIns, before any kind of social media, we had bulletin boards. I'm now talking the years, for those that are old enough to remember, 1992, 1996-ish. We had news groups. People were engaging using primarily text. Then they were engaging using images as the technology would mature. And then in the early to mid 2000s, a little bit of video, more and more video. Now you have TikTok that you guys might be banning soon in the US, which is video only. But at the core of this, despite the technology changing, the willingness of people to engage into meaningful interactions, into conversations, that never changes, never has changed. Storytelling, we've been telling each other stories since the first campfire, I guess, or even before the campfire. That becomes more and more important. So when you're looking at building a business, the best recommendation I could make is focus on what doesn't change, what will be here tomorrow, because none of us have a crystal ball to predict the future.
Well, I think that's very sage advice. And in fact, in order to make sure I made the time this morning, I skipped my technology networker at the new Ion Center here in Houston, which is sponsored by Rice University. And it's very interesting to have people like me who are consultants to business meeting with what are, generally speaking, some very young entrepreneurs. Some of them have, college age, a couple even high school age. So it's a very dynamic time in the world. Let's switch gears a little bit here in our question number 2. You are also an active investor in sports franchises, including previously a semi-professional rugby club. What attracts your interest in sports franchises and rugby in particular?
I think it's a great transition from the first question. I don't think there is too much of a dichotomy between the first and the second question. It goes back to community. Where do you find the most engaged communities? The most loyal communities in sports. I talk to you're in Texas, Dallas Cowboy fan, right? Obviously, those go way beyond Texas because we have them in France as well. I grew up as a Raider fan. I still am. Lord forbid, it's been over 20 years since I've had some satisfaction on the field. Yet I'm still a Raider fan. And what attracted me to the Raiders very early on is I was very sensitive to brand. Right. So, for example, here's a brand. Here's a rugby team, our local rugby team in Haguenau, France, right here, for those who have video. Okay. Yeah. And something we're going to talk about a little bit later on the back end. Right. So what's interesting about sports is that you can directly engage with a fan base. You can carry a message that's a sports message, tag along a sponsor message in a very organic way, in a way in which it resonates. So and now I'm talking primarily about amateur sports and semi-professional sports. When you go into pure play pro sports, it tends to get a little different. But at an earlier stage, if you're looking at an amateur sports team, it's typically run like an amateur startup. You have a lot of volunteers, a lot of people that work for free, some of which have been with the team for 30, 40 years. They only have the team's best interest in mind, clearly, because they're not getting paid. Yes. They're diehard fans. They will do anything for this team to, in many cases, survive, because the team has very little in terms of means. And then as a corporate brand, you can identify these niches, these pockets of opportunity, step in, sometimes for very little money, and help that team grow while growing your own brand. So the local team here in Haguenau, northeastern France, we've been with now for just a little over a year, that we invested in. We completely redid their entire brand, their jerseys, the derivative products, like the one that's right on this table here, mouse pads, bags, jerseys, the whole gamut, with a redrawn brand, which is their own, which is a historic brand. The club's been around for 50 years. And tag along our brand, Masters of Trivia, and growing them together in a very symbiotic way. Every time their brand is shown, ours is shown. Every time ours is shown, theirs is shown. It's also shown in a way that's engaging to the fan base, that's engaging to the press. So every Sunday, typically, or every Monday, sorry, because the games are on Sunday, the weekend games are covered in the press, on social media, and you can measure the impact that you have for your own brand, and you can measure the ROI, the return on investment, or what we call the return on brand, the ROB. You can measure it down to the dollar. There's software today that allows you to see how many times the human eye on social media, or when they're looking up the pictures of the weekend game, has seen your brand and put a value on that and calculate what the ROI is depending on the ad spend that you allocated towards that effort. And what we found out, and that's to answer the second part of the question, why rugby, is that if you look at sports in general, according to our research, internal research, and we spent a lot of time on that, the number one sport in the world in terms of ROI, sponsorship ROI, is ping pong, table tennis.
Okay.
When we saw that, we were like, wait a second, how is that? And I have a late brother who was a businessman as well. He would only sponsor table tennis, and he had told me this already 10, 15 years ago, and I kind of brushed it by the wayside and said he probably had one too many drinks to tell me this today because it was on a weekend. And it turns out it was right. So but very often it's due to extreme examples. So let's take one example. During COVID, we all remember COVID.
Yes.
We all remember that all sports games were literally banned as a result of human contact. When that happened, in places like ESPN, pure play sports channels panic, right? We had all these games planned. Now we got nothing to show. What do we show? What's going on? What do we have in our library? What can we show the people? What's engaging? Oh, we have the World Championship for ping pong from last year. Ping pong is always interesting to watch for anyone, whether we like it or not, right? But now behind that table, with the camera angle straight on it, you have now a game that's never been seen before, where 2, 3, 4 million people per week watch now these World Championship tennis ping pong organization, and the sponsor behind the table spent $3,000 to have their sign there and getting millions of dollars worth of exposure. So you have dramatic ROI, dramatic ROB, return on brand, as a result of this once in a lifetime lucky event. Lucky, I put this in brackets clearly because it was during COVID. The second sport that comes close to ping pong is rugby. Here I'm going to take another example, driven purely by metrics. If you're looking, for example, at the French national soccer team, as you call it in the US, soccer versus football, even though we play with a foot, you typically, now we have the Euro Cup going on as we speak. France is qualified for the round of 16, which they will play on Monday against Belgium. There will be roughly 12 to 15 million people, French people, watching that game, give or take. The rugby team tonight, which is the final between Toulouse and Bordeaux, for what's called top 14, top tier, the equivalent of the NFL in the US, will be roughly watched by 8 million people. So give or take a little bit more than half the soccer. But the 30-second TV spot on the soccer game costs 50 times more than the 30-second spot on the rugby game.
Fantastic.
Why is that? Major delta. Well, the reason is what we call in the advertising business the upfronts. The first one is sold upfront, as the name indicates, ahead of time, a year ago, just like the Super Bowl spots that are going for $7 million a piece.
Right.
Where all of the big brands, primarily consumer brands, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, the largest advertising spender in the world, will outbid each other to be in that spot because there's a finite amount of those 30-second spots to buy.
Absolutely.
The rugby is not sold this way. It's on a first come, first sold basis. So you don't have this inflation going on, yet you're reaching the exact same person, the exact same butt is sitting in front of the TV station, in this case mine. I will be watching both games. So why is it that my butt in the chair watching the football game, the soccer game, costs 50 times more than my butt in the chair watching the rugby game? It makes no sense whatsoever. The impression is exactly the same. So we're looking for these opportunities. And in amateur sports, you have massive opportunity for investment. I would recommend any serious brand that's looking to generate positive, strong ROI on their brand to follow a similar path. If you need help with how to do it, you can contact me.
That is incredible. And by the way, Houston, Texas, where I am, has just announced that, and it's out in a suburban location, is the Houston SaberCats.
I follow them. I follow them on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So they are, and I met with their. He's now part of my LinkedIn loop, is their head of promotion. So it's interesting because it's just hitting in Houston also. Let's move on to number 3. One of your newest ventures ties in with the growing interest in trivia. Tell us about Masters of Trivia, which I hear you put on a shelf 20 years ago, but you booted it up last year. And of course, you've showed us your drinking bottle next to you with the Masters of Trivia on it.
Yeah, this one right here.
Right.
So trivia is very interesting. It's a very interesting topic. I've been a trivia fanatic since a very early age. I used to compete in quiz contests in a format where you'd get hit up on any topic in 5 different languages. You wouldn't know which topic would come next and in which language it would come to you. So it's the ultimate in terms of multitasking. But at the most granular level, what's really exciting and fascinating about trivia, it's the core unit of knowledge. In other words, if we're looking at our own discovery path online, if we have a question in our minds today, what we do is we typically type it into Google. If we're looking for George Washington's birthday, we're going to take the answer because it's going to be immediate, boom, and we're going to be happy with that because it's the only thing we're looking for. But if we're looking for Ronald Reagan's curriculum, we're going to have to dig deeper. We're going to see his birthday. We're going to click likely on Wikipedia. Wikipedia giving us an encyclopedia knowledge on pretty much anything. And that we're going to sift through and maybe find what we're looking for, maybe not. In all likelihood, we will find it. However, there is a missing piece to the puzzle, which is how do we test our own knowledge against any topic? What if we had a de facto Wikipedia-like resource that allows us at the most granular level, be it a butterfly, a bird, an American president, a football team, an obscure topic in another language, a systematic way of testing our knowledge on that topic, learning as we go in a gamified way. This is really what we're setting up to do, basically helping the world become smarter on any topic. Today, you may have seen it earlier today, we celebrated Mike Tyson's ear biting of Evander Holyfield, which happened on June 28, 1997, believe it or not, 27 years ago. So for those who remember that event, that was almost 30 years ago, 27 years ago today. So in this case, we use that as the hook. It's a bite, but we can call it a hook, a marketing hook to draw people in. Oh yeah, I remember this event. And then here is a 23 question quiz about Mike Tyson. You can test your knowledge about what you remember about him, what you know about him. But the objective is to do this on millions of topics, on any topic under the sun, in any language under the sun. So it's an absolute massive undertaking. On the same lines, we're organizing the first European Quiz Championships. I don't think I mentioned this to you, but this is an event.
I haven't heard this yet. Go ahead.
I will invite you to. It will take place in our neck of the woods here in northeastern France in Alsace. The website is currently under construction. It will be quiz67.com. 67 is the name of our department. France is divided by departments. And it will bring together over a Saturday, Sunday, players from around the world, primarily European, that will compete on Saturday in a confined environment in the massive sports hall against each other. And then on Sunday, the following day, we will open up the winners who will then compete against the rest of the world in a hybrid format, both online and in the physical presence, with a massive screen where people can follow what's going on. We're going to provide more context prior to every quiz contest, meaning that if you're playing a quiz about the Civil War, you will get a 3-minute clip playing first to draw the people in, to give them more context, rather than taking the average Frenchman who knows nothing about the Civil War and just parachuting them into a quiz about the Civil War, which would make no sense.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this in French, in German, in English, and in Alsatian, which is our local language.
Yes.
So that's going to be the gist of the event. But coming back to the trivia itself, it's also a massive business opportunity, which ties together with your first and your second question. In other words, tech, sports, and Masters of Trivia. How do they all tie together? Well, if you can target a user down to the most granular level, and you look at these unit economics, and you're knowing that you can create a quiz on any topic under the sun, in any language under the sun, you can pick any. You can drive community to that topic because no matter how targeted that interest is, let's say fly fishing, not in general, but fly fishing in northeastern Montana, you will have a community of fly fishermen in northeastern Montana that you can target with a quiz that's specifically built for that purpose. And then you can tie in local guides, fly fishermen from northeastern Montana that will want to sponsor that quiz with pinpoint accuracy, content and context. When you're going to that guide, today, he's probably using some Facebook ads, he's probably using some Google ads, maybe some other venues, but very often he's challenged to find the right medium that is perfectly aligned with his line of business. That is no longer the problem here with what we're setting up to do. We can give him the perfect context and the perfect content and align them both together and make them both resonate without turning off the user. Because if you're, as we all know, very often when we like content, we're annoyed by the advertising that's superimposed on top of that content.
Absolutely.
But if that content, if that context is perfectly aligned with the content, if I'm playing that fly fishing trivia quiz about Montana, and the ad that's rolling right next to it is a fly fisherman from northeastern Montana, I'm not going to be turned off by it. I might actually click on it. I might actually contact it.
Dom, we could do this for hours. As you know, we talked before we began recording, and we have so much to talk about. But like I said, we try and keep this to a certain length so that people actually watch this fascinating interview. I know I'm looking forward to seeing this again. Tell people, how can they get more information about you? Where should they go?
Probably the easiest way is the way you found me, is on LinkedIn. So
okay,
I believe I'm the only Dom Einhorn, D-O-M, not Don, not with an N, with an M like Mary, Einhorn, yes. E-I-N-H-O-R-N. And from there on, you'll find the links to Masters of Trivia, our website, and everything else.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.